Welcome everybody to the podcast. Tony Robbins here. Today I have the privilege to introduce to you, or maybe reintroduce if you watched the podcast from last year that we did, a dear friend of mine, a man who's a great spiritual leader. He's a man of inspiration. He's a master communicator. He's a man of God. He's a speaker of the gospel. He's a voice of hope and love and warmth and I think a voice of reason for tens of millions of people, including myself. And he's really unique. Bishop Jakes is a bishop. He's also a TV and film producer. He's a Grammy-winning, award-winning music producer. He's a New York Times #1 bestseller. He's written 40 books. Yes, 40. And he started out, being raised in West Virginia, and he starts his first church at 23 years old in West Virginia. And now he has his own church, of course, the Potter House in Dallas, Texas. It has 30,000 people that participate. It's non-denominational. And you have this incredible gift, that this ability to move people so much that Time Magazine back in 2001 said you're the best preacher in the United States. And you're the preacher I think most preachers kind of model around the world today. So I want to welcome my dear friend, TD Jakes. Thanks for being here, TD.
Thank you for having me. I'm so delighted. Anytime I get to breathe the same air, share the same space, or be on the same Zoom with you, I always come out a little better and learn something that helps to broaden my perspective. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you. Well, you're here to broaden ours. I'm here to listen and learn, as I always do when I'm with you, brother. We're going to talk about his new book. It's called Don't Drop the Mic: How the Power of Words Can Change the World. There's 440 pages of pure magic in this, and I'm not blowing smoke. It's gorgeous. You give stories, strategies, tools. You even have a partner in crime, so to speak, who goes through, and he's a brilliant scholar, and shows where some of the organization comes from in your history, like the shoulders you stand on, just like I do, and different shoulders. But also he goes through it and takes one of your sermons and kind of helps us break it down. It's an extraordinary book. And I've read many of your books, but this one is truly unique. My first question is simple. Why this book? Why now? Why a book on communication to me is obvious. Why now seems somewhat obvious, but tell me why for you now? And maybe tell us a little bit, Dr. Frank Thomas, his role, and perhaps just clarify. Most people think drop the mic. You're saying don't drop the mic. A lot of people think that's the goal. Maybe you can clarify the metaphor.
Well, drop the mic is something that became very popular amongst the hip hop. At the end of a performance, they would drop the mic, and it became a cliche to represent that you had this powerful moment. It was a drop the mic moment. Yeah. So I just reversed it and said, don't drop the mic. And initially, to be honest with you, Tony, I started out writing a kind of a legacy book to pass on to the next generation what I had experienced during my tenure of ministry over these past almost 45 years. Yeah. The diversity of platforms that I spoke on, both faith platforms as well as secular platforms, as well as business platforms and entertainment platforms. I had such a panoramic view of articulation from so many perspectives that I started writing about that. And then it evolved that the pandemic came and the racial tensions arose. And I thought, wow, while I'm talking about talking, our nation is trying to have a conversation and we're talking over each other and at each other, not to each other. And I had to include some elements about that into it, as well as your intimate, most personal relationships. Don't drop the mic on talking to your children. Don't drop the mic on talking to your wife. Don't drop the mic on dealing with hard subjects and tough times. To believe in the power of communication, to be the conciliatory agent that is necessary to bind up the wounds of brokenhearted people is the substratum of what made me write the book.
That's beautiful. Tell me, maybe you can share with our audience, you write about it in the book, about the influence of one night watching your father watch the news when a very special man came on who became obviously at least one of the role models in your life, a very important one. Tell us a little about where this began and how that developed a belief in you that a person with a microphone can change the world.
Well, first of all, I'm about 6 or 7 years old. My father is like a Goliath giant to me, a huge mammoth man, both physically and my opinion of him was huge. And this was one of the rare times that he wasn't working because he worked a lot. And I was watching, the news came on, and there was a man of color speaking. At that time, that alone was a rarity. To turn on your TV set and see somebody who looked like you speaking was very, very rare. And my father's expression I don't know. I went back and forth between looking at the way my father looked at him and looking in amazement at how he handled the mic and how he tackled the problems that were pervasive during that time period. I grew up in the era of the 60s with colored bathrooms and colored water fountains and the Vietnam War and all of the chaos that was going on in our country back then kind of mirrors all the chaos that's going on right now.
Yeah, very much so.
And instead of grabbing up a gun like some people did during those times and are doing today, Dr. King grabbed a mic. And it taught me at a very early age, it left an indelible impression upon me that a mic can often be more powerful than a gun. Yeah. And we live in a society today that anything we don't like, we want to shoot it. But what we need to learn is the power of words, the power of communication. Dr. King exemplifies it. Mahatma Gandhi identifies it. In many ways, Nelson Mandela exhibited it through the apartheid. And I think if we're going to ever have a more perfect union, then we have to become more involved in speaking to people outside of our sphere. That means you can't just be CEOs talking to CEOs. You really need to get down to grassroots and talk to people outside of your bubble. We have created all of these bubbles, but they're asphyxiating because we don't get doctors talk to doctors, preachers talk to preachers, unbelievers talk to unbelievers, believers talk to believers, and yet we're thrown into this homogenized society that asks us to live together, and we can't live together if we don't learn each other's language and how to talk to each other.
Well, one of the things that I was touched by in the book was the understanding that Western history is usually taught in a written form, but West African history and African history is usually taught in an oral form. And then, of course, there were times, obviously, for Africans that were slaves that they weren't allowed to even read or do something of that nature. But it even goes earlier than that. It was the tradition of learning. And you've carried that tradition on. And Dr. Thomas, I guess, played a role in looking at some of that. I mean, obviously.
Well, Dr. Thomas's expertise is in African-American preaching. I mean, that's what his doctorate is in. That's what he teaches at the university. And it's a substratum of what his passion is. He not only is a preacher, he's a professor and a theologian and a scholar. And he challenges me to explain to people how I do what I do, which was very, very challenging because, you do what you do. You don't really often think in terms of passing it on to somebody in an explainable way that causes them to be able to benefit from the dynamics of what you do, because what I do is such a mixture of the science of linguistics and the art of connectivity.
Yes.
Collaborate together in such a way that you can't distinguish the science from the art of it. To know it is one thing, science. To feel it is the artistic part of it. And there I am trying to explain something that is not always tangible. It is not always, and great communication isn't just tangibles. It's not just the definitions of words. It's all the inferences and implications that come from the words. And whether you're having a discussion like we are, or whether you're trying to talk to your wife, we use the same words, but they don't always mean the same thing. Right. And understanding the distinctives can determine whether you end up in divorce court or having the second honeymoon.
Yeah, big difference. I've always said the things that affect us most are invisible forces, right? You can look at you can look at physical things, gravity, too much, you're dead, too little, we're gone, right? Radiation, without enough, we're dead, too much, we're gone. But I think the most powerful force is human emotion, and understanding that words are triggers for those emotions and that we're responsible for how we respond to them. We certainly have that choice, but different words have different potency, and you've really been extraordinary. That's why I've been such a fan of yours, is both the quality of your intellect, most importantly, the quality of your heart, but also your capacity to express that in a way that reaches the human heart, that pushes through those limitations. And your church is not all African-American, your church is a mixture. Right. So, you've been able to reach people all over the earth. So I'm curious, what part of Martin Luther King, come back to him for a second, what part of him have you embodied or has become a part of you? I'm curious from your perspective.
Well, I would never be as presumptuous as to compare myself with him. I think he was one of the most amazing orators of my generation.
I agree.
His
maybe of any generation.
to paint such picturesque language and words, the way his voice inflection, his presentation, his mannerisms all led to an unstoppable force that actually changed the world as we know it. And so, but I think it affected all of us in some way to be inspired that there is hope in talking to people in language. And then you have to understand the underlying inference of faith in the Black community means something different than it does in most white communities, where a church is totally about faith. For us, it was where the civil rights movement was born. It was where our first schools started. It was the first platforms people like Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight, many others sang on. They started out in a faith platform because that was the only platform we have. Consequently, today, when you get ready to reach our community, to bypass the faith element of it is to bypass the gateway that opens up all of the community to you. And so understanding that, preacher, when you say a preacher, what you picture depends on what your experiences are. And in our community, that includes activism, that includes social justice, that includes business advice, that includes looking over contracts before people buy houses. We come to our pastors expecting a lot more from them than just elements of faith.
Yes. Well, his faith, much like Gandhi, was a model for him as well, that peace could be the solution, that unifying us was the answer, not separating us. One of the beautiful things your book did is it brought some of that history of the African-American experience in the midst of you teaching people how to communicate and bring their voice forward. It's a beautiful synergy that you created here. I'm grateful that you created it.
One of the things that I would like to say, particularly to your audience, living in a bubble is expensive now. You make statements that you have to spend millions of dollars to correct in damage control and public relations. Most CEOs, executives, entrepreneurs are focused on diversity and inclusion and equity. And as you do that, you don't hire people for decoration. You also have to include them into your life. You can't just include them into your office, but to include them into your life so that you can circumvent bad choices. Maybe this means something in this community. I have done it myself. And in the book, I talk about how I offended many Kenyan people while I was trying to ingratiate them. And I didn't understand that what a particular word meant in their society. I quickly found out as they lit up my social media for about 2.5 days with fire, hell, and brimstone. I quickly retreated and said, whoa, I didn't know that. So what you don't know can be expensive. It can be detrimental, and it can cause you to alienate an audience as we become more global and as the country waxes more brown. If you're going to ingratiate and have a following of any kind, you have to be diverse in your ability to communicate with them and understand sensitive tones, whether it is for somebody with a learning distinction or whether it is for somebody who is smaller of stature, getting the right language to communicate with that sensitivity. I know it's laborious, I know it's frustrating, but it is the catalyst through which growth is attained. You have to grow beyond that which is familiar to you.
Otherwise, there's no expansion. Otherwise, we just live in a box, right? And then,
right.
You know, there's one thing that makes people happy is progress and growth, right? Where we grow, so we have something to give. And if we don't grow, we don't have much more to give, and then life becomes really empty. It's just about the self. And anybody who's focused on themselves, see so many people today that are extremely well off, and they're angry all the time. What are they angry about? They're angry because they really aren't growing. Right? You know, when you give it somebody everything, you think that's enough, doesn't matter what color their skin, that there has to be some form of growth. If you remind me of a funny example of one of my early days when I was in my 20s. I went overseas for the first time, and I was talking in this country and I didn't understand what's going on. I said, this is so important. Like I was doing this and all of a sudden people get really riled up. And then I started to make the linkage because I do that a lot. It means the middle finger in the country. So I was like, screw you, right? So you got to understand customs and culture for sure.
But you know what's funny about that? Most of us, when we go overseas, will really study and get a briefing about the culture.
Yes.
But we don't study people in our own country who are distinctive from us.
Good point.
We don't provide them with the dignity of the importance that says you are worth studying, you are worth the focus of my intellect so that I don't inadvertently offend you. And
Yeah.
you have to learn in the language of the people that you want to reach what is the most effective way to do that. And I think that gives us some room for expansion, for development, for inclusiveness, for a more harmonious, a more perfect union, whether that union is in a marriage or in a workplace. There's a different type of poor. All poor people are not the same. There's a difference between being poor in the inner city and being poor in the middle of America on a farm where you're barely able to make ends meet. They're both poor, but they have different dynamics and different enemies and different things to contend with. You're not stepping over needles. You're not dealing with gang violence. You're dealing with a different kind of poverty. And so when we start respecting each other's story and listening and learning that story rather than allowing the media to tell us who other people are, we do a lot better. And so what we're doing in saying don't drop the mic is let's keep talking, even when you get it wrong, even when you get trolled, even when you get corrected, even when you get your feelings hurt. Don't draw back and stop talking. We've got to keep talking because we've got to keep breathing the same air, drinking the same water, sharing the same space, often sharing blood transfusions. If we can share blood, we can share conversation.
That's right. We have so much more in common than we have apart. It's just ridiculous, but it gets magnified. I know you and I talked offline. You've seen The Social Dilemma, and those who haven't, I hope they watch it. And you see how there's a certain class of people that now are treating you like you're a lab rat. They know how to stimulate you by giving you what you already believe and then piss you off by making another extreme, keep certain information from you and keep you online. And it just makes them $1 trillion. Literally, some of these companies are worth $1 trillion now with a T.
Yes.
But one of the beautiful things that I think that you do, and I think it's required, if we're talking about quality communication, you just said the first step in my mind, which is got to know your audience, got to know what they need. You got to know what their hurts are. I think the language either you or maybe it was in the back of your book that Dr. Thomas gave was this idea. I used to talk about fear into power, but you were talking about pain into power, right? Moving from pain into power and how to shift that. But you can't do that if you don't know someone's story, what they're going through, what they're experiencing, including your wife or your children or someone else. So I want to know for you, to me, communication is about connection and it's really about serving in some way. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it is we connect and serve. Without it, we have nothing. But what do you see as the purpose of communication? And from your perspective, and how do you know when you're effective? What makes you so effective? And I know I'm not blowing smoke your way. You know who you are. So what do you think it is?
Well,
at its core, I mean, there are many things, but at its core.
First of all, we are one of the few species that are able to communicate both verbally and in writing, to change the meaning of something with a voice inflection, with a suffix or prefix changes the definition of a word. And we're able to write that, and we're able to read that, and we're able to speak that. So you don't see ants writing books. You don't see that sort of thing. And I think that we don't want to lose that. With 163 characters, we would have never gotten the Gettysburg Address. We would have never gotten Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. We would have never gotten Edgar Allan Poe. We wouldn't have gotten James Weldon Johnson. All of those great writers and thinkers and orators of all different cultures and kinds culminate when we respect language. And I think respect is a substratum of communication. You cannot communicate with something or someone that you don't respect enough to study. And I suggest in the book, it's not enough to study your material. You also have to study your audience. You have to study who's coming in the room. What is the demographic? What is their story? What are sensitive touch points for them? In order to be a great orator, you have to be able to use an illustration that connects with that crowd, that audience, that situation. And putting that kind of time into it is respect, because whatever we respect, we give time to. And whatever we don't respect, we don't give time to. And so subliminally, when we don't really do the research, we're saying you're not important. Yeah. And so we have to be retooled to think beyond the parameters of our sociological construct to embrace diverse types of people. And I think for me, I was amazed that people thought that I was a great orator. I never thought that I was. But what is really striking to me is to be able to add language to heart, to be able to express what a feeling feels like. You know, what does pain feel like? What does love feel like? What does hurt feel like? What does depression feel like? The more adept we are at being able to take those words and use them as paintbrushes to paint a picture that you can see of an abstract feeling that I am having, the more congenial our relationship is going to be, the more empathy we're going to have, the more connectivity becomes possible because we are hearing. And in the book I talk about, while the book is about speaking, it is just as much about listening as it is about speaking. Because if I lose my hearing right now, then eventually my speech is going to deteriorate. Though there's nothing wrong with my tongue, the deterioration of my speech is coming from my inability to hear. And we're living in a time right now that we've lost our hearing. Yeah. And it's showing up in the way that we speak to each other and about each other. We have stopped listening, so we have stopped speaking to each other correctly. That kills a marriage. That kills a business. That kills a company. That kills a company that doesn't have a way of listening to its consumer. That kills a business anytime you don't have a way of listening to not just the person in the C-suites, but the person who is pushing the broom knows something you need to hear. And really smart people make everybody a teacher.
That's true.
And they become a student. And that's what makes you smart, is that you never stop learning. You never stop learning, and you can learn a little something from just about anybody, including your children.
The greatest business people I know, men or women, they practice that. They don't talk about it. They've actually institutionalized it. I have a dear friend that built half of Las Vegas, and he's always told me the greatest breakthroughs he's gotten have been from the bellman, from the people behind the counter, because they know. But you said there's a quote in your book that I've used often as well. And it's that the best form of communication is when you hear what's not being said. In order to do that, you have to invest at a different level, not only in the history, but also in this moment to see and feel and experience rather than predict in your mind what you think you're going to say. I can't tell you how many times I've organized the talk. And my number one thing is, who's there? What do they believe? What do they want? What are their wounds? What are their hurts? What are their desires? What are they proud of? Like I will, before every talk, I have this battery of about 40 questions that I ask. I have my team ask it. Then I ask the people when I get there. Then I ask to see some people there. And then I'm able to customize it in a way that really makes sense. But I also think you brought up something else, which trust and respect. Yeah. I think those two qualities are the most important foundation for any quality relationship, business, personal, intimate. But you ask people a lot of times, what does it take for you to trust somebody? And the response most people will give me is, well, it's just a feeling, or I trust them because they've done what, they said they do. But I said, have you ever had somebody who's done what they said to do and then they didn't? They said, yeah. I said, well, could you trust an enemy? And I don't really believe in enemies, but use the metaphor. Mm-hmm. And they say, oh, well, I don't know. Well, yeah, you can if your interests are aligned. If we can find how our interests align, we can trust each other. If I win and you win, if I lose and you lose, if we're tied to the hip, you can trust somebody. But then respect. What does it take to respect somebody? And I think it's knowing the other person brings something to the table you don't have. And that requires honesty with yourself, some humility, but also just opening your eyes. And there's no human that I've ever met that I couldn't learn from, that isn't superior to me in some way. But I don't look at myself as inferior, because I also know I have a unique life experience and there's certain things no one's like me. And so it allows me to see that person in an equal level. But I think trust and respect, without that, human communication does not last. It breaks off very, very quickly. But I'd like to know, what about presence? Great communicators have presence. Martin Luther King has presence. I'm not saying you're Martin Luther King. I know you're very humble, but you have your own unique presence. And that's, by the way, really important. I see so many people try to copy you, or in my world, copy me. And it's usually entertaining, right? Because they're missing their power would be to be themselves. So what is presence for you? And how would you describe what it means to speak from the soul? Because I know that's the language that's in me and in you. How would you describe those two things?
I think that I am the most powerful where I am the most passionate.
Yeah, me too.
And that is to say, I'm not a good liar. I have to really care about it.
No one is.
Yeah, I have to really care about it. My heart has to be in agreement with my brain for my mouth to be potent. And so understanding that about yourself may limit the subject matter that you embrace, but it will impact the audience more powerfully because there is some synergism between what is impassioned in your heart and what comes out of your mouth. I think that is very, very important. I wanted to say a comment about the word trust. You know, in business, to set up a trust, you're going to invest in it. And I think it's very difficult to trust people who want power without investment.
Yes.
So regardless to what the nature of our relationship is, the greater the investment, the more likely I am to be able to trust you.
I agree.
And that investment can be the curiosity. It can be my favorite sentence is, what did you mean by that? Or
yes.
We'll get through with the meeting and I'll say, what did you think about that? Because it is through that I make sure that what you said is what I heard, that what we experienced, we walked away with the same thing, that maybe your perspective can broaden mine. Yep. That's respect. To ask questions is respect. We never ask questions of people that we don't think have answers. And anybody we don't ask questions, we don't respect. So to invest with your curiosity, to invest, whether it's financially or a study or research, or to invest your gift to be able to reach a person, it creates a trust because there is an investment there. And I think that is very, very important. And I will never care how much you know until I know how much you care. And the more I know how much you care, then what you know can become more beneficial, and it can be banked in the warehouse, and a trust evolves out of that, and a building of a relationship evolves out of that. And I think that's very important today, because we are allowing that which is artificial to replace that which is spiritual, emotional. You mentioned the word soul, the engagement of my passions, my purpose, my pain, my strengths, my weaknesses, my fears, my certainties, and my insecurities make up the elixir that makes me who I am. Yes. It is not just the parts of me that are glamorous. It's the parts of me that are broken and shattered and sensitive and tattered and torn. Add to the whole elixir and the recipe of who I ultimately become when I walk out on stage. And that presence is a composite of all of those experiences. And might I dare add, that sitting in this chair is also my grandmother and my grandfather and my great-grandfather and my great-great-grandfather, and all my ancestors are all sitting in this chair, so much so the chair ought to break, because I didn't get here by myself. I am the sum total of everybody who came before me.
So true. I have a simple rule I tell everybody. I said, I'm not a great speaker. I don't really look at myself as a speaker. I'm a communicator, but I'm a source of influence. I'm here to help someone make a shift. That's really my goal. My communication is to persuade someone what's possible for themselves and to move them forward, as opposed to what's impossible.
I don't know about that. I have had the terrible task of having to speak behind you. So I don't know. I don't know whether I can let you get away with that. When we were in Canada and you mesmerized 8,000 people in a stadium, and then they put me up to speak and you sat back and watched, I thought, oh, this is great.
I sat back and got mesmerized, and I'm not blowing smoke, brother, because we're different. That's what's so beautiful. We're different in our approach. You're so eloquent. Your language is so amazing. But I think what's true is I have a rule. I won't speak about anything I'm not passionate about. If I'm not passionate about, I want to learn from somebody else who is, because obviously I don't have enough value there. I'm not here to just speak to speak, right? But I was touched in your book. It's in a different part of the book. About 2/3 way through the book, you interview Dr. Tom, or you bring in Dr. Thomas, and you write several chapters. And that's where I got some really beautiful pieces about the oral history we talked about. I want to go there a little bit later, but one thing that triggers me right now is this idea that in the African-American community, soul has been so well developed because of so much pain. Meaning, if you can go through so much injustice, so much pain, so much just insanity, and you can find hope still, that's the soul's depth. That's the power of it. And anyone I know, no matter what color their skin, who has something to deliver, it's usually because they've been through hell and kept going, and then they had an intention. I'm making the movie of Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if did you ever read the book by chance?
No.
It's Viktor Frankl. gentleman who was a Jewish man who, it's an extraordinary book. When somebody is like in a really bad place, I give it to him. And he witnessed his family being killed in front of him, 2 of them thrown into gas chambers. And he survived that experience because he created a reason to communicate in the future, a reason to live in the future, make sure this never happened again. It's a pretty amazing story. But again, the people that can reach people have soul. And so many of us are trying to avoid suffering. And yet suffering can have a deep meaning. I don't want suffering on any human being. My whole goal is to end suffering for people as fast as I can. But I also know the value of suffering. Can you address that? Where is suffering in our lives? Is it required? Is it necessary? Where do you see it is?
What makes life amazing is death.
Yeah.
If life would not be valuable if the clock were not ticking.
Yeah.
It is the fact that we lose people that makes us learn to value people.
Yeah.
You can't have north without south. It is the polarization of both experiences that causes you to find the middle. So if you're going to be a balanced person, no matter how much your net worth is, you cannot escape suffering. There is going to be hurt feelings, hurt bodies, hurt circumstances, loss of loved ones, and each one educates you in some way that none of us enjoy it and none of us seek it or want it, but inevitably all of us experience it, and it is what is common amongst all of us, and none of us escape it. And we come here naked, we die naked. You can take nothing with you that you attain. So all of these little toys that we're playing with in the dash between the 2 dates, we don't get to put none of them in the casket with us. And if we do, we still can't take them with us. And what we do have is a collection of experiences and moments and memories that enrich us, that engage us, that cause us to gradually, very gradually become better people. I don't think that you become a better person overnight. I think you gradually become a better person through the mixture of good and bad and sunshine and rain and pleasure and pain. And finally, you start to draw conclusions. And when you start thinking about that, I wanted to tell you this because when you were talking, it made me think about something John Lewis said. Yes. They asked John Lewis before he died what he thought about Black Lives Matter as opposed to the civil rights movement. And he said, in many ways, it has the same purpose and synergy and passion. And he wanted the young people to go forward. And then he said the strangest thing. He said, the only thing I wish they would do that they don't do, he said, is when they march, they ought to sing.
And
that
changes the whole experience, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a whole because
that brings the spirit into it, doesn't it?
Exactly.
You know, a higher consciousness to it.
Exactly.
And the unification of singing and so forth, not just anger as unifier, but like the higher spirit as unifier.
Anytime you can sing while dogs bite you, and while water hoses are turned on you, and while you're beaten over the head with clubs, there's a different sound to the song that comes from a soul who has had to climb their way up and has dirt in their fingernails than somebody who took voice lessons. It's a beautiful tone. But when you sing from your soul, you sing from the wounds of life, whether they be wounds that were inflicted through divorce or brokenness or stillborns or parents with Alzheimer's. It changes. When he says to sing, I just got chills all over me because
I got chills when you just said it too. It's just so beautiful.
That's what songs
it is the missing ingredient for not just one particular movement. It's the missing ingredient, I think, for so much of humanity that's living in this place of right and wrong, good and bad, and there's not the unification. There's something about the human spirit. But as you said, the tone, the pitch, the feeling that comes from having experienced that is what penetrates. It's the only universal experience. I tell people all the time, the one thing you can count on is suffering, but you don't have to stay there. That's our choice whether you stay there or not. But everyone's going to have extreme stress. Are you going to let it destroy you or drive you, right? It's like, who is not going to have an experience, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their economics, regardless of their history or their background, regardless of how many people love them? Everyone's going to have extreme stress. They're going to lose a loved one. They're going to have somebody says you got cancer. You're going to be in a position where you get robbed. There's going to be a fire at your home. There's going to be an economy that drops down. You're going to lose your job. How exciting is all that? But there's no one who escapes it. I've seen some of the wealthiest people in the world, and then their child is born with gigantic physical difficulties, and I watch the suffering they go through. No one escapes it. So the question is, what are you going to do with it? And I think the other thing that those extreme stress things do is I've noticed they remind you how strong you really are if you push through. If you keep pushing through the whole thing, if you're going through hell, keep going. And the other thing it does is it shows you who your real friends are. Like who really cares about you, right? Not your Facebook friends, and no disrespect, but the people that actually care about you. When the going is tough and everybody else goes off to their stuff, those are the people that matter. You don't need a million of those people. You need a few humans that you really love and are there for and love and are there for you. And the other thing it does, I think it strengthens your psychological immunity. I have a friend that was locked up, in North Vietnam for like 10 years, beat on a slab where they make, pee, and the acid from his pee would go down his back and burn him. I remember he spoke for me years ago. His name was Captain Coffee. And Captain Coffee, he went through this piece where the IRS came after him. And like, they were really being abusive, in my opinion, as his friend looking at him. And he's like, you know what? He goes, they can do nothing North Vietnamese did to me. There's nothing that can make me stressed now. That's the immunity that comes if you can push through that suffering. So I don't want it for anybody. But the suffering I've gone through, you've gone through, the people you love have gone through, there's a purpose in it if we use it and don't let it use us. It's like stress uses us or we use stress. COVID uses us or we use COVID to make better movements, better decisions. The situation that happened here a year ago, we got to figure out how to use it, not be used by it. So I couldn't agree with you more. Tell me this. You and I have both made mistakes as speakers, right? You talked about that in your book. I remember early on in my career, I used to always do these free guest events so I could show people I could really deliver not a talk, but a transformation. And so I'd always have somebody, who here's got something you can't change? Who's got an uncontrollable phobia? Who's got a problem you can't change? Who's totally depressed? And that was my signature. And it always seemed to work. I found a way. And this one time, this person, 3 people are pointing and the person didn't volunteer. And I used to do that anyway. And I put that person up there. And TD, I was there. It was a free guest event, supposed to be an hour and a half. And 3 hours later, with about 30% of the people were left in the room because I wasn't giving up. And I finally cracked the case with almost nobody left in the building. But I learned something. I got to get someone vested a little bit in wanting to change, perhaps, if I'm going to try and do something in front of an audience in 20 or 30 minutes. But what's the situation where you fell flat and what did you learn from it?
Oh my gosh, there have been many. I did a high school event with a bunch of high school kids, of which I had nothing in common with. And I walked in the room and I felt like I flunked. I don't know whether I did or didn't, but I felt like I flunked. Number one, high school kids, they don't want to be there anyway. And they're sitting there and they're kind of looking at me like, yeah, what are you going to be talking about? And the combination, in order to be effective, I have to find, there's a chapter in the book where I talk about finding the joy.
Yes, the connection. Yes, I remember.
I have to find the joy. What connects us?
Yes.
What is a bridge that connects us? I could not find that bridge in that room in enough time, and I did a terrible job. But I learned from it that finding the joy that connects us and building out from there is how we are able to embrace new and different kinds of audiences. If you find the joint, what is common to us. And right now, what is being pumped into our veins is what's different about us.
Constantly.
You constantly, for ratings, for dollars, for advertisement, for hits on a site, we are being pitted against each other continually until our houses are splitting. It's not just our country. We're splitting with our own relatives. We're falling out at the Thanksgiving dinner table.
Yeah.
Because
think about it. Conflict is throughout humanity. Conflict sells. We'll talk about this in a minute because you're really good at using drama in your speeches. But what is drama? It's conflict. And so you think about it, if there was a movie or a book and the movie starts out with, we got a main character and they're happy and they're healthy and they have great relationships and they're doing great economically and they're connected to God and they have a beautiful mission. And then halfway through, they're happy and they're healthy and great relationships, beautiful mission and healthy. And in the end, who's going to go to that film? Nobody. So unfortunately, human beings are pulled in by drama, but drama is now used where it bleeds, it leads in the media. And now you don't have to go for the news. It follows you in your pocket. It travels through social media. It's a different world. You and I both have had the experience of recently finding ourselves speaking to empty rooms, talking to cameras. You know, I watch, obviously, many of the pieces that you do, the sermons you do, and you got about 9 people in this giant auditorium that you built. And me too. I'm talking to people in 195 countries. I'm seeing them, fortunately, on a screen, so I'm seeing them in the rooms, but it's not the same. So tell me something. How have you had to adapt to be more effective without an audience there? Or have you had to? Or are you doing the same thing?
Well, it took me back to how I started.
You and me both, brother. My first event, I thought it was going to be 500 people. 7 showed up, and they're all different parts of the room. I'm like, come down here to the front row.
Yeah, that is the advantage from starting from ground level zero. Yeah. All life can ever do is push you back to where you started. So it pushed me back to where I started. And where I started was preaching to the people that I imagined were listening.
Oh, that's very cool. Yes.
Yeah, that's where I started. I started with an imaginary audience.
Yeah, me too.
And an imaginary crowd and an imaginary need and an imaginary circumstance. And from that, I began to speak to those empty chairs as if there were people there. And there's something about faith calls those things that are not as though they were. There's something about if you can envision something that hasn't materialized yet, then you have the power to make that thing become whatever you envision it to be. And so when the room went empty, I just envisioned it as if it were not. And I kept on talking, though I was in an empty room. I looked like a fool, but people all over the world were listening. My audience all over the world has quadrupled in this year. Wow. Our numbers have gone up 300% in this year. 52 different countries zooming into our service in this year. And in spite of the atrocity of the virus and the social justice issues and all of that, it created a vortex where people all over the world are looking for something to hold on to while life is filled with boisterous winds and galing air all around us, leaving us in a tempestuous situation for which there seems to be nothing solid to hold on to. That's when faith becomes almost tangible in the absence of anything to hold on to other than the inner strength of your convictions. It's like working out in the gym and they put you on a ball and tell you to lift weights. And because in the process of everything being unstable, you find your core. And so the core of who we are is strengthened when everything else is shaking around us. That's when our core becomes more solidified and more profound. I wanted to say this too. I think when you talk about everybody suffers, that's true. But people who are trained to think analytically and in a linear fashion find it the most difficult when they are suffering because they have not allowed space.
They're not emotionally fit. They haven't been worked out before. It's like a kid. If you've had a kid that's protected his whole life, never breaks a bone, he's scared to break his bones as an adult. But if you broke all your bones, it's like, give it to me, baby. I'm going to live this life, right?
Exactly. And for them, when I talk about don't drop the mic, struggle with finding words to express abstract ideas and struggle with it. And if it's better to write it, write it. If it's better to speak it, speak it. And don't start out talking on social media about sensitive issues. The reason we often alienate audiences is that we're talking to the world about something that we should be talking to a friend about. Because if there is a trusted relationship and I call you and I say, hey, Tony, I'm thinking about this idea. Does this sound crazy to you? And you say, hey, man, if I were you, I wouldn't say that because somebody could take that this way or that way. We try it out on billions of people, and then we're shocked when we get all of this blowback coming back at us because you cannot, if your world does not reflect the world that you speak to on social media, then you haven't developed the skills to speak to that audience yet. Until your audience, your life becomes a microcosm of your following, then you have no litmus group to test your ideas to see how they respond in different settings.
And that's absolutely true. I echo everything you said. And Aristotle also said, to avoid criticism, say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing, right? Which is not an option for anybody who really cares. And we also live in a culture now where it used to be if you didn't like something, I don't like that film, you just didn't watch it. Now somebody wants to cancel it and do it,
Right.
get rid of it and everything else. It's a funny little phase we're going through. Funny is the nicest word that I can find for it.
Yeah,
but,
it's
let's talk about fear for a second, because if someone's going to pick up a book that says, I want to be a greater communicator and I'm going to do it beyond one person, even with one person, it can happen depending upon the person. One of the biggest fears people have besides dying, it's rated up there in the top 2 or 3, is public speaking. Right. And I don't have that fear. I remember in the beginning, I was thinking about me. And very quickly I learned there's zero fear if I'm not thinking about how I'm doing, but if I'm focused on serving you and I'm noticing what's working. And if it doesn't, not being attached to it, just changing until I find it, because I'm here to serve. It's like you always tell people, if you're afraid, it's because you're thinking about yourself.
Right.
That's my approach. What is your approach to coaching someone who might be saying, gosh, I really have a voice. I want to share, but I'm just afraid, especially in the world we're talking about. You already gave them some good advice about their audience. But what about just dealing with the fear of getting up and speaking in front of a group of people?
I think that you grow as a speaker. And you're not going to go from being silent all the time to being an orator that speaks in front of millions of people on the first trip. Let's start with 3. Yeah. Let's start with 10. Yeah. I think we have, the times we live in now, everything is instant gratification. We click a button and it posts immediately. Greatness is not something, it's not an app you download. It's something that has to grow like a rose bush. It has to grow. It has to evolve. It has to bud and blossom and bring forth fruit. That whole process is necessary because it informs itself as it develops. Right. As it develops, it increases itself. It becomes more profound as it develops. So I would say to them to start out in a room, before you go into a room, you don't. And to begin to build confidence and some dexterity of wit and nimbleness of mind starts in small spaces. And I'm going to say something that's really strange, and this may kill the whole interview. Talk to yourself.
That's great.
Talk to yourself. We don't engage ourselves. We don't entertain ourselves. We have so many things to entertain us that we don't use our brain anymore to entertain us. One of the great privileges of growing up poor, I was poor, but I didn't know it. But one of the great things about being a poor kid who didn't get toys, you had to create toys out of sticks and rocks and go down and play in creek beds, and it made you creative. And so sometimes you have to get there before you get there, and you have to talk before you get in the room and get the rehearsal of being able to verbalize what you are trying to happen. To verbalize it is quite different. When you take a couple in my business and you take a couple and you bring them in for counseling and they have to verbalize what they're angry about, a lot of times it's very difficult for them to put it in words. So they start insulting each other. No. You don't get to insult her. Yeah. I want you to verbalize what you are angry about. And the more they begin to verbalize, they have to calm down to do that. They have to think to do that. They have to get engaged to do that. And in the process, a little fairness creeps in and a little perspective creeps in and little by little. But if I just allow you to sling insults and rage, and what we do now, we call you names. You're a race baiter. You're a this, you're a that. You're homophobic. Whatever we want to call you, we call you a name to avoid listening. Yeah. Because once I can put you in a category, I isolate you there and I don't give you credit for being a human being. You're a white man. You're a black man. Anytime people can put a label on you, they can put you in a foul and discredit you. And that's why I don't like labels. Even when people say that I'm a minister, I say, yes, I'm a minister, but don't put a period where God put a comma. I'm a person, I'm a thinker, I'm a leader, I'm a CEO, I'm a creator, I'm a writer, I'm a man, I'm a father, I'm a guy, I'm a fool, I'm crazy, I'm funny, I'm stupid, I'm smart. All of that is sitting in this chair right now. And to have the whole spectrum of yourself engaged in the process when you speak to people. Yes. They get to, because I've heard you speak, you'll make them laugh, you'll make them cry, you'll have everybody jumping. and leaping through fire and doing cartwheels and stuff like that. You can get them in, but you bring all of Tony Robbins comes to the stage. It's not just a piece of him. It's all of him that comes to the stage. And I think that in order for you to be a great orator, you have to know who you are and bring all of yourself with you when you stand behind the mic. And when I said don't drop the mic, that means that the mic is attached to something. It's influence, it's power. It's not just speaking. It's a platform. It's a stage. It's social media. It's technology. It's arts. It's drama. It's film. It's music. It's song. Whatever God gave you to work with, that is your microphone, and you cannot drop it.
Yeah, I love you personally. I think you know that. And love's a strong word for a lot of people, but it's just the truth. But I also think that when you look at what makes you effective, in my mind, looking across the table at you, it's all those parts of you that you describe that people don't want to take in because it's too hard. Most people are cognitive misers. They just want to figure it out real quick. Also, they don't want anything they have to be questioned. So the fastest way to not be questioned or have to think or communicate or persuade or share or anything is just label somebody. But the one thing that I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that is behind it all, the one thing that'll go through every shield is not judgment, but love. I mean, you can't influence somebody while you're judging them.
Right.
You pour so much love. I loved my audiences. I really think and feel who they are. I know they're different everywhere. Like you, I've had to adapt as well. I mean, I went from 2019, a typical year, going to 116, 117 cities and 17 or 18 countries, some 2 or 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 7-day programs, 250,000 people to 2.5 million people this year. And I've gotten to be home. That's why I now have a little baby girl, because I don't have to be a nomad. I'm still doing some live events. But I love, when I go to China, I think what's different than when I'm in Japan. And then even amongst them, who's there in that audience from that country and what's going on? What is the culture? What is the experience? So most people don't want to do that. But where is love in the magic of your power?
It's everything.
I think so too, brother.
It's absolutely everything.
Absolutely everything. I told my people, I said, if you love these people, you got through to them. But if you're sitting here trying to do a presentation, just go home.
Yeah.
You know?
It's everything. And you know what's funny about it? When somebody loves you, you can feel it.
Yes.
You can sense it.
Yes.
It's great to say it, but you can also sense it. The legitimacy of it comes through in the way you engage with the person. And not only can we feel our love toward each other, the people who are listening at us can also feel that. It's infectious, it's contagious, it spreads through the audience, it spreads through the family, it spreads through the corporation, it spreads through everything that I took a tour several years ago. I talked about in the book about going to Nike, and everybody from the gate to the CEO, everybody was saying the same thing about the company, how it started, what was important to it. The message had permeated the entire staff of thousands and thousands of people. They were all infectiously excited about Nike. And I left there, I was so inspired, not only about Nike, but I thought, I want that in my life. I want that in my office. I want that in my family. The synergism where we have the same story and the same enthusiasm, regardless of our status, it means that the brand has gone in before it goes out. Sometimes we're trying to get the brand to go out, but it hadn't gone in. And you have to build the brand inwardly before you build it outwardly.
And that's true of our culture here. Nike, they don't talk about the mistakes they've made, which they've made plenty, right? Child usage of peace over. I mean, you could go on and on if you want to tear Nike down, but you can also look at what they've created, the number of people whose lives have been touched, the jobs, the people going to school, all those things. And they're focused. I always tell people what's wrong is always available. We need to look at it so we can fix it. Right. But if it's constant, you've missed life. What's right is always available. And if we can't spend more time on what's right, we can't unify. We got to be able to hear what's wrong and address it, and also feel what's right, because otherwise there's no balance. Then it just becomes judgment and there's no love. And I think the penetration, the unifying factor that makes somebody a great leader is they create a culture. Average people follow the culture. Leaders create a culture. And if it's a culture of love, everyone will feel it. And like you said, it's infectious. It starts to touch everyone. Listen,
I think what happens, I want to say this because I think it's important.
Yes.
Anytime you start dealing with sensitive issues between a couple, between races, between cultures, between countries,
Yes.
What we often look for, because we are solution oriented, is who do I blame? Whose fault is this? Okay. And if you enter into the stream from whose fault is this, you can't resolve the problem. I had this experience that I shared. I think people will really enjoy the book, but I was driving down the road and I was a young man and I came over a hill in West Virginia. And when I came over the hill, there was a car wreck. And I pulled over to the side of the road. I ran over to the man. There was blood all over the windshield. The windshield was cracked and he was bleeding. And I said to him, "Do you want me to call the police?" And he said, "No, call an ambulance." I never forgot it, because calling the police means who was at fault.
Yeah.
Calling an ambulance means I just want to get better.
Yeah.
We can figure out who gets the ticket later. Right now, I need an ambulance. I think we're calling the police on a society that needs an ambulance. And until we understand that that telling the truth about our history isn't blaming you, it's owning the reality without painting this facade of who we really are, so that we can demystify why we are the way we are now. We have to go all the way back to what happened then. You can't come in the last scene of a movie and figure out the movie from the last scene. You got to go all the way back to the beginning and find out why this character is enraged. So when we might shoot it out of sequence, but when you air it, you have to air it in sequence. And what's wrong with us today is we can't have a conversation about then, because all we hear when we talk about yesterday is, "That's not my fault. That's the police talking. I want the ambulance. Yeah. I'm just telling you why I'm bleeding." Okay. Yeah. And so if we would stop being defensive, which kills marriages, which kills employees, which kills harmony as a country, the moment we stop being defensive, we get greater. On 9/11, for a period of time, we stopped being defensive and we got greater. Yeah. We weren't arguing.
We unified.
We unified up under attack. We immediately unified, and all of a sudden the country stood in solidarity, and nobody cared who was rich, who was poor, who was black, who was white, who was Democratic, who was Republican. We had been attacked, and I'm saying it shouldn't take 3,000 people falling on fire out of a building to bring us together and remind us that we are better together than we are apart.
So well said. So beautiful. So beautiful. Listen, I think that we're living in a time in which unification is the power, and we have to be able to go back and bring it forward. We have to understand where things stand. But we also, just like in a relationship, in those relationships you're talking about, the question I want to know is not just what do you want? What do you need, more importantly than even what you want? To me, I used to have these big mission statements when I was a kid growing up. I'm going to be an expression of God's greatest love, and I'm going to inspire millions of people. And it went on for like 45 minutes. Now my mission is really simple. How can I help? And it feels so sincere and real, and it shows up every way. Anybody you're with, how can I serve? How can I help? And I think when we come to that place, it gets rid of a lot of those pieces, because it shows this is what I'm here for. I want this to be better for you. And I think we have to show that to each other, like you said, whether it's in a relationship that is intimate, or whether it's a business one, or whether it's a racial situation, or it's another country, it's there.
Absolutely. And we have to be patient.
Yes.
With the patient, because sometimes if a doctor walks into the hospital room and asks the patient, "What do you need?" he may not have the aptitude to be able to articulate what he needs. But if he asks him how he feels, he can tell you how he feels. It hurts right here. I don't know what I need to fix it, but it hurts right here. And I think that while we develop the language, it takes a while, even in a marriage. If my wife walks in here right now and says, "What do you need?" It depends. Are we talking about dinner, or are we talking about
what do you want? What do you need?
How
can I help? How can I help?
That could go anywhere, But if you will let me find my way into the conversation, because I may not have the ability. And when I don't have the ability, Dr. King said that rioting is the language of the oppressed. When I don't have the ability to articulate what I need, all I can do is be angry, and I'm just angry, and I want you to fix it, but I don't know how to write the prescription. So what has to happen is when we know someone is injured, we have to understand their limitations to articulate what is wrong and figure out what they need. In a relationship, sometimes I want my wife to fix something that I never even articulated was wrong, and got angry with her because she didn't respond to something that I never even said. Or maybe if I walk in there and say, "What's wrong with you?" and she just starts crying, I don't know. I don't know. I have to take the time to allow to be patient with the patient, because they don't always have the ability to write the prescription because their thoughts are blocked by their pain. And I think America is hurting right now. The people who are the most angry in this country are the people who are the most hurting. Yeah. Whether it's middle America, where the steel mills have shut down and the farmers are not making money and the crops are not growing and there's an oppression there, or whether it's the urban areas where there's issues where you're trapped by invisible walls of systemic racial perplexities that are difficult to articulate. It's education, it's housing, it's so many things, it's family, it's generational problems, family. So understanding that we all have these needs, we have to be patient with the patient. And those of us who don't have those needs, black, white, and brown, and there are black, white, and brown who don't have those needs, on the basis of the fact that we don't have those needs, but we have other needs, that's the brotherhood of humanity. I might not need what Tony needs, but I need something, and I can relate to your need because I know what it is to be successful and still have a need. Yeah. Because people often think that if they see you on TV, you don't need anything. that if you got a nice car, you don't need anything. And sometimes you don't even notice the car you're driving because of the pain you're feeling. Yeah. You know, and sometimes we don't treat the successful because we buy into the myth that success cures personal pain, and it doesn't always do that.
No, it does not. It rarely does that, actually.
Yeah.
Dr. Thomas was a big influence on this book and big influence on you in so many beautiful ways. I know he wanted, it appears, to make sure that your place in history was there as well by articulating this unique way in which you've been able to communicate to hundreds of millions of people around the world through all these different tools that you have and the scalability that technology brings us, but you brought a message to it that went beyond scalability, it went to the heart. And one of the great ways he described, or you together described what you do, was use the metaphor of cooking. And I learned by reading the book, I didn't know that you really enjoy cooking. Yes. But having this idea of a recipe, this idea that you need the ingredients, but you also need the directions. And that the combination is the essence of how you get something done, even as a communicator. But I also found, and I want to, if we could talk about three pieces he described that are part of your background. You talked about how you always do things from scratch, meaning these fundamental ingredients that you use, and that many of those come from the Christian tradition. Some of those obviously come from the African-American tradition, and a combination of the two. He listed many examples, but there are three that he pointed out that I really found interesting. One was drama. This idea that you can use drama effectively to capture the human spirit, to awaken somebody to something. And then the second one he talked about was the will to adorn, this idea that we have this desire, all of us, it comes from within, this desire to have big beauty, experience beauty, surround ourselves with beauty. But he gave some really unique understandings to me, the white American, as to why, let's say, African Americans are pulled in a certain direction. Some people think exaggerated beauty or overdone beauty. And he said there's never enough beauty and it's never overdone. I just thought it was fascinating and it made total sense. And then the third one was storytelling and folklore, which you're magical at all three. So can we start maybe with drama? And when he described drama, he gave these 6 elements. I wrote them down here. Let's see where they are. The freedom of bodily expression. He's talking about drama and the African-American communication, African-American churches. That what was unique about it was you would use the freedom of full body expression, the freedom of emotion to be expressed, the tone that could vary, the volume and the call and response, and then those pregnant silences. And it's like, I read that, I was like, Quincy Jones always said to me one time, he goes, your DNA, Tony. So what's that? He goes, you're damn near African. And if those are the criteria, I certainly match a part of it. But tell me a little bit about how important drama is for someone to be effective as a communicator, whoever they're talking to. And then let's take a second to look at this idea of adorn to beauty and a little bit of storytelling. We'll do them one at a time if we can.
First of all, let's take the drama. Christ spoke in parables.
Yes.
Told stories.
Yes.
And they were dramatic stories. And he did them to describe the abstract kingdom that we couldn't see. And it said the kingdom of heaven is lacking. And so drama takes something that you can't touch and brings it down to something that you can relate to.
Yes.
Okay. Drama connects us. It connects us with abstract ideas and brings it center stage, often through the dynamics of a story, because it is easier to scrutinize a character than it is to admit that's me.
Yeah.
Okay. So sometimes I can teach you something through a character. A certain man had two sons. I can teach you something through a character that I couldn't say to you directly. How are you treating your kids? You don't spend enough time with your kids. You're going to get defensive. Oh, yes, I do. I do. So. But if I tell you a certain man had two sons, I don't have to fight through your defense.
Plus stories entrance you, right? They take you internal. If I want you to think about your high school years, I talk about mine. If I want to talk about your mom, I'll talk about my mom, and you go there. You can't help it, right?
Exactly. And all of a sudden you are in that moment. A perfect example of that was when George Floyd cried out from beneath Chauvin's knee for his mother.
Yes.
White women, black women, brown women, every mother on the planet saw her child under that knee. And said,
father.
Hold up, he's calling for mama. I'm coming, baby. There are certain things that are common to us, and drama creates that. That's why the arts are so important, because drama creates a platform to do that. The second thing that I want to say about drama is important. In a remote control world where we click a button and we can cut you off, we're not going to sit there long if you're standing there like a stick and the only thing's moving is your lips, and you don't have any drama, when we're used to being sensory overload through all of the devices that we have, and we're watching multiple screens simultaneously. And now you want to bring me in for an hour and lecture me and hold and captivate my attention. I think the drama, the full engagement, the whole cacophony of the orchestration of you, what makes an orchestra beautiful is how we take all of these different instruments and orchestrate them to produce a song or tune. That's the same thing that a speaker does when you take all of you and it's not just bringing it and throwing it all on the table. It is being able to orchestrate it in such a way that there is harmony to produce an expected end. So we do that through the instrument of dramatization. Yes. When we start talking about adorning, we had to adorn. Poverty demands adornment. Mm-hmm. Poverty demands.
Explain, if you would, what you mean by adornment, if you would.
To decorate, to enhance, to take an abstract idea and make it visual, to make it colorful, to make it more palatable. Adornment is what we do with food when we season it. What are we having for dinner tonight? When the kids come in the house and say, what are we having for dinner tonight? And you don't say, well, we're having cumin, and we're having cinnamon, and we're having a little paprika and seasoned salt and a little bit of garlic powder sprinkled over chicken. You don't give them the adornment. You tell them we're having chicken. But when they taste it, the adornment is how you season it that make the chicken exceptional. Because if you actually just gave them the chicken without the adornment, it would not be nearly as sensational. So the ability for a speaker to be able to bring seasoning to the statement causes it to be an experience and not something to be endured, but something to be experienced. And people walk out saying, you should have been there. I can't even tell it like he told it, but you should have been there. What they're saying is, I didn't have the cumin, and I didn't have the garlic powder, and I didn't have the crushed cloves, but there was something about that chicken that was exceptional. And it's always not the chicken, it's the adornment. And so to adorn a message, to adorn an address, sometimes it is the fact that you fell down on your knee to propose. It is the fact that you had music in the background for the first kiss. It is the fact that the tinkling of Chablis glasses connecting together, it makes the moment memorable. All of that enhances, it adorns the moment. It isn't the moment, but it adorns the moment. And so we come from a history that required adornment because we didn't have money and we didn't have things. So we had to adorn the moment through little things like jumping the broom when we got married, which was the African tradition. You had to adorn the moment. We couldn't go shopping for wedding gowns and do all of that sort of thing. But that does not mean that there is not a poetry, even in poverty, that there is not class and beauty, even in pain. There are certain things that adorn even the most unpalatable situations that cause them that you have to back up and look at it and say, wow. I never will forget being in Soweto, in Alexandria, in South Africa, then going into this very oppressed area, and they had dirt floors. And I noticed the floors were dirt, no wood, no tile, no carpet, nothing like that. They were dirt floors, but they were swept.
Yes.
They swept them. Yes. With brooms. They kept it neat and it was beautiful. And you could see the broom marks in the dirt. They adorned what they had.
Yes.
So if you don't adorn a hut, you won't adorn a mansion.
Yeah.
And so the art of great speaking is to adorn it until justice flows down like mighty streams of living water, cascading down into the deepest parts and the dungeons of lower Alabama until, that's adornment.
That's adornment, all right.
The mastery of linguistics to adorn something that otherwise would be hard for the audience to hear.
Yes.
But Dr. King was masterful at adorning a text.
Sure was. And what makes somebody a great storyteller? There's drama as a part of that. What other component is there that makes a great storyteller? Because, Jesus, as you said, was a great storyteller. I think part of it is he related to people with his stories. He didn't go recruit Christians. He went to the fishermen and said, become fishers of men, right? Oh, I understand the whole process. Put a little out, they bite, bring them in. So, but what do you think makes somebody a great storyteller, or how can someone become a better storyteller?
When we don't leave spaces where words end to communicate ideas. And that is to say, I use a Bible story because they're easy for me. Blind Bartimaeus, the Bible says, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging, and he heard that Jesus was passing by. It doesn't describe the Palestinian wind, the sand that had cut into his bones, the aches and pains and the disappointment of being set there every day. It just says he sat by the highway side begging. And then it doesn't dramatize the fact that though he was blind, he could hear. And how, in spite of losing one thing, he had not lost everything. And he had learned how to use what he did have against what he did not have. That's not written there, but that's part of the story.
Yes.
And he cries out to Jesus at this high decibel pitch scream, have mercy on me. But if that's all you read, but you didn't read the intensity behind it, that it was the desperation that provoked the scream, and that his heartbeat was racing and his blood was pulsing through his veins and his neck was strained when he screamed above the crowd to catch the notice of a fleeting moment, that if he lost this moment, he may have lost his miracle. And so desperation drives him beyond protocol and makes him become more rambunctious and demonstrative to get the attention of the only help available, because it was in fact passing by. So when I stopped, you see that? So when I said it was in fact, and I paused, that's the pregnant pause.
Yeah.
It allows the hearer a moment to catch up to the dramatization of the moment. Or you just read the words.
Right.
And how empty is
Then
that?
why do you need a preacher if you're just going to read the words, right?
Yeah. You. When I read words, I see pictures. That's why I do movies. That's why I do films. I see pictures, and then I describe the picture, not just the word, but I describe the picture that is created, so that you have a sensory perception that goes beyond that which is intellectual and goes down to the soul, and you can feel blind Bartimaeus and his desperation and his groping, pressing feet, standing up and crawling to get to Jesus in the hopes that he might leave just a wee better than how he came.
You step into the experience as if you're there, and you bring
Absolutely.
People. As I always say, you can't move people if you're not moved. You can't touch people if you're not touched. And unless you're in the experience, you can't bring someone to that experience. And you are magnificent, both in linguistics, but your capacity to step into that moment and live it as if you're there yourself and share it with your audience allows them to experience it as well. It's gorgeous. You talked about, having, the ingredients and then having the instructions. But you and I both go off the instructions. In fact, you talk about that in your book. You said, I forget the language you used, but something like, what great communication is. I'm forgetting the exact language, but it's the capacity to follow those directions until you don't, like knowing when not. When do you know not to do? I have my own version of it, but when do you know not to get rid of what you thought you're going to do? So often I'll work with my team, my creative team. I'm crazy. I over-prepare. I work for hours and hours, days and days, lay it out. I'm a syntactician. I believe sequence matters. The dog bit Johnny, Johnny bit the dog. Very different if you're Johnny, right? So I know sequence matters, and I feel it, and I lay it all out. And then I go to the audience, and 80 or 90% of the time, I'll use some of those things, but not in the sequence, because I just feel something else is needed right now. I can see it. I can feel it. I don't do it based on a presupposed element in most cases. So how do you know when to go off script? And give us an example of you going off script and why it was more effective, if you don't mind.
Let me answer you in a long roundabout way, and I'll try to be quick. I'm in Johannesburg, and I was invited to go on a safari as a part of being a guest speaker there for these billionaires that they had over there. They invited me to go on a safari, and it was my first time going on a safari. I took my son with me, and I'm sitting beside on a Jeep early that morning. My wife wasn't here and going; she stayed in the house with the doors closed, peeking through the window at all the animals. My son and I got up early, and we got out there and we went. And I'm sitting beside a zoologist who's driving the Jeep. And out on the end of the engine of the Jeep is a metal chair place where a Zulu is sitting there with a rifle, and we're going through the jungle.
Yes.
And the zoologist is explaining all of the various components of the zoo, how the animals' teeth are cut in such a way that when they bite the branch, they prune it without destroying it, and how nature is so designed, or God, if you please, is so designed the planet to be self-sustaining, right down to the hoof prints of the animals and what it does to the soil. It's very interesting. But the problem was we had been driving all day and we had not seen the elephants. And he explained the elephants, but he couldn't find them.
Yeah.
Toward the end of the day, the Zulu stood up on the edge of the Jeep and licked his fingers and put it up in the air and said, "The elephant is over there." And all of a sudden, my head exploded. My head exploded not because of the majesty of the elephant, so that was incredible, not because we found the elephant, so I wanted to do that. My head exploded because suddenly I realized I was sitting in between intellect, he could explain it, and instinct, he could find it. You have to engage. I love that. You see, you have to engage both intellect and instinct. Yes. Intellect makes you able to remember a particular piece of content, information, data, stats, whatever it is that you're getting ready to deliver. Instinct tells you how to find it, how to deliver it, how to convey it in a way that is most effective. And instinct happens in the moment. It doesn't happen on the paper. It happens in the moment. There's an instinct. I have gotten up to speak with things written down on a piece of paper, and right before I got up to speak, thought, throw your notes away.
Same
and
with me.
just talk out of
Same with me.
Have you ever done that?
Oh, tons, most of the time, actually. And I'm not exaggerating, it is most of the time. But I still value feeding my brain in advance. It's kind of like making deposits in a bank account. So when you go to cash a check, it doesn't bounce. And if you've made so many deposits of experience and life and emotion and commitment to understanding who you're here to communicate with and what you're passionate about, what you think can help them, then there's plenty to pull from. But it's part of like, result. I always tell people success in life is a result of good judgment, right? You make good decisions, you're going to have a great life. Good judgment comes from experience, right? That's where part of our instinct comes from. And experience often comes from bad judgment, right? It's like you learn. Right. So, but I think trusting that instinct, whether you have history or not, you're still a human being. And I think we all have it, but people don't always trust it. And that's one of the great gifts that you have. That's why the spontaneity of what you do, like you've done your homework, you know your core message, the messenger that you're describing, what is your message? But you also can vary in the moment and embody it all those pieces.
Well, if you think about it, intellect on the level that we're talking is unique to the human species.
Yes.
But instinct is common to all forms of life.
That's right.
It's why turtles lay eggs on the beach, and the moment that the turtle eggs are hatched, they instinctively turn toward the water. And sea turtles will immediately flap their way down to the water without instruction. It's instinct. It's why birds fly south in the winter. It's instinct. It's why whales mate in Mexico in January and December to March, because it's instinct to go where the waters are warm for the birthing and the raising of their babies. Instinct. And we have both. Good God, we have both. We have intellect. We've got the zoologist. We have the intellect. And we've got the Zulu, we've got the instinct. And if we put them together, because sometimes what wins your son, if you're losing ground with him, isn't your intellect, your degrees, your accomplishments, or writing him a check. It's the instinct to understand this is a be there moment. Be there moments do not come with warning labels. It's instinct. And so the instinct is just as important as the intellect. Whether you're building a sermon, whether you're pulling a cake out of the oven, the instinct says that the recipe said, leave it in there for an hour and 20 minutes. My instinct says it's done at an hour and 10. Yeah. My instinct overrides my intellect. I pull it out then, and had I left it in the full time for my oven, it would have been dry. But my instinct saved my intellect. What we want to do, and the reason I wrote the book, is to adorn you with both the intellect and the instinct, to be able to be better at verbalizing, the sensitivity to know when and where and how to bring your best self to the stage, whether the stage is a typewriter, a laptop, whether the stage is the company you own, or whether the stage is the family you love. We don't want to lose any stages. And the thing that will cause you to lose the stage is if you don't recognize the value of the mic.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And you just did the best summary of your book that anybody could give. Of course you would, it's your book. So I hope people pick it up. I think instinct and intellect are harnessed when you have a purpose that's bigger than yourself.
Right.
I think when there's a purpose for what you're doing more than yourself, there's something about life that supports something that's supporting more of life. Like you're doing it for yourself, it's certainly life's going to show up for you. But if you're trying to do it for your family, you're supporting more of life. I think you're different inside. A community, humanity. I'm not talking about virtual signaling bullshit. I'm talking about what's in your heart.
Right.
That, in my experience, the instinct and the intellect come together for a higher purpose, and you don't have to think about it. It just comes through you. And then it's your job, as you said, to recognize and use it. But when you're already focused on serving, it tends to happen, in my experience. So let me ask you,
the older you get, the closer you get to valuing selfless giving toward purpose and destiny and legacy. I think when you're younger, you're trying to prove to yourself, do I have anything?
Yeah.
And once you answer that initial question, do I have something? Then the question becomes, how can I use it to better serve something bigger than myself? Because suddenly in the middle of my life, I realized that I am not living with you. I am dying with you.
Yeah. Your own mortality, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Yeah. The moment I know that I am not living with you, that I am dying with you, then our conversation becomes so rich.
True.
I mean, talking to you right now, I lose sight of the fact that anybody will hear our conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Our conversation becomes so rich because we were chosen not only to live together, but to die together. And we're having this conversation in time while the clock is ticking.
Yes.
While the clock is ticking. And we will never, if we do this again tomorrow at the same time, in the same place, in the same clothes, we could not recreate this moment to save our lives. This moment stands in a category all by itself, to be savored, to be enjoyed. And then it dissipates and goes to live in our memory bank until our memories are gone.
Yes. You make it so rich because you said, my wife, I always call her Dr. Death because she always compares everything to death in this area, but death being a counselor, not a jailer. That's the difference. Some people think of it as a jailer and it becomes fear. And I think you quoted somebody in the book here, where you're talking about when we fear something, we either worship it or we don't understand something, we worship it. I think it was Alice Walker. We either worship it or we fear it, right? And learning how to utilize that as a counselor so that you find a more deep meaning in your life is so powerful. So I want to ask you, in a world that's so divided, if we're not going to drop the mic and we're going to use our intellect, not just spew things, and our instinct, what are the most important things that those of us who have a voice, and we all have one, when the world we're in today, everybody has a voice. The question is, will you be heard? Right? And it doesn't even matter what the scale of reach is. It's the scale of depth of reach, right? It's not reach like I can get to this many people. It's how deep can I go? What would you say are some things, maybe some principles that you would say would guide someone to not drop the mic in that moment and to not push people away, or bring ways to make sure we find ways to appreciate and unify rather than separate? Because you talked about in the book, if I remember correctly, the language I think you used was something like those that communicate in the way that separates or builds a bridge. Right. How do we, in those moments, not screw it up by just our own emotion or our own desires, but use it to build a bridge instead of distancing or pushing people away from us?
Let's let COVID-19 become our teacher. There are 8 billion people on the planet, but it infected us one at a time. The real change happens one at a time.
Yeah.
It didn't affect every country at the same rate or the same pace, but little by little, one at a time, it spread. And at first we called it an epidemic, and then it kept spreading and spreading. And then they said, no, it's a pandemic. Yeah. And then it became a matter, it was almost unstoppable when it happens one at a time. And that's something everybody listening at us can do. One at a time, we can change the world. If we delegate that responsibility to Congress or presidents or senators or governors, then we will misappropriate our own human responsibilities, because the changing of the world begins with every inhabitant in the world. And so to the degree that you have influence, you start the change where you are. Whether you're an entrepreneur and you've got 3 people on staff, and all of them look like you, act like you, dress like you, think like you, then you have the challenge to integrate your team and have an experience that not only creates diversity, but inclusion. Diversity invites me to the party. Inclusion asks me to dance. Mm-hmm. So you start one by one by one.
That's a great distinction. Will you say that again? I want everybody to hear that. That's beautiful.
Diversity invites me to the party. Inclusion asks me to dance.
That's gorgeous. That's gorgeous.
So I think we have been doing a lot of diversity. We've invited people to the party,
yeah,
but they're never asked to dance. They don't go to the after hours happy hour. They don't go to the event at the golf course. They're not really in our life. They're decoration for our books. And so when you include people and make them a part of the family, then our distinctions begin to change. And so it starts with who you invite to dinner. It starts with you coming to my house, not just me coming to yours. It's an amazing experience when you come out of areas that you control. How much more you learn about people when you don't control what time dinner starts and what we're going to have for dinner and what's going to be on the menu and what kind of music is going to be played. As long as you are in control, you may invite me into your control, but I'm still subordinate. Give up the power of always being in control and sit down on the floor with the Japanese and have a meal, even though you're not good with chopsticks. Have the experience where you don't control all the variables. It starts on that level. Go through a neighborhood you drive past. The highways allow you to bypass them, and so does your heart. Because anything you can drive past, you can live past.
Talking about having the experience. Yeah, I've always said that a belief is a poor substitute for an experience.
Absolutely.
You can have a belief about white, black, brown, purple. You can have a belief about China, but until you go to China, and not a sanitized version of it, right?
Right.
As you described, because we call it an American experience, is more of a sanitized one. But if you go be there with real people and real experience, then you start seeing the universals and you also see the differences. And then you don't just learn them. Many of them become a part of you. My final question for you, dear brother, and thank you for going for so long and going forever with you. I just looked at the time, gone way over, but thank you. And before I ask you that, I want to just remind everybody, you got to go pick up this book. If you're not convinced by now, you never will be, but go pick it up. Just don't drop the mic, right? This is your opportunity. My last question, simple. What's the purpose of your life at this stage? At 63 years old, when I say purpose, like I said, everyone expresses it differently. There are many purposes. And what are you most passionate about today?
I have always been one of those crazy nutcase individuals who thought he could change the world. And I remain optimistic that I can change the world.
Yes.
And with the degree of strength and days and wind and breath that I have left, I want to do things that leave the world better than when I found it. So when I look at real estate, I'm looking at housing. I'm looking at creating workforce housing and creating better community options for people who are first responders, because now we're living in cities where the people who serve the city can't afford to live in the city they serve.
Yeah.
So I have this lofty notion that I can change the world, that I can get inner city kids pointed towards science, technology, engineering, and math, that I can make inroads there by exposing them to summer classes on STEM and after school classes that help to subsidize what they're not getting in school. I still think I can change the world. Out of the 30,000 formerly incarcerated inmates that have gone through our Texas Offenders Reentry Initiative, on one hand, we're training the inmate for a job. And on the other hand, I'm meeting with CEOs saying, will you give them a chance?
Yes.
And so I'm trying to supply need and supply, because sometimes there are CEOs who really want to make a difference.
Yep.
But you putting an ad in the Wall Street Journal won't reach the guy you're trying to touch. Okay. And so I want to be a bridge that connects supply and demand, so that the best of us can go forward with the country, rather than to sit around the pool waiting on those that we have elected to change the world, because they are encumbered by politics when it comes to changing the policies that create a better, more holistic country and a better and safer world. Sometimes they have to obey the rules, and it will take 10 years to do something that you and I can get together and do in 10 minutes if we don't relegate all the change to their plate. Certainly a degree of change belongs to them, and only they can do it. But Dr. King wasn't a senator, he wasn't a mayor or a governor or a president. He was dead at 39.
Yeah.
And yet there's not hardly a country you can go into that doesn't know who he was. And he did all of it before he was 40. We are the people we have been waiting on. And it starts when we speak up, not when they speak up. It is when we speak up. And I still think I write toward that end. I live toward that end, that I could leave a legacy behind me that I change. If I didn't change the world, I changed somebody's world.
Yeah.
If I could change somebody's world, then to them, I changed the world.
That's true. That's beautiful. Well, thank you for not only sharing with people how to be more effective communicators professionally, personally, but for the spiritual and soulful nourishment that you always bring because of who you are as a man and as a soul. Take in what you've heard today from this man's soul to yours and decide, what can you do? What can you do today? Because so many times people say, I don't know how. Dr. King didn't know how. You know what and why. You know what needed to happen. You knew why it needed to happen. And then, you know, how will show up. The tyranny of how is what keeps people from starting, I should say. It's what stops people. So you're not one of those individuals. And I hope today people have been inspired on multiple levels to live a deeper, richer, and a more integrated life. So blessings to you, my brother. And thank you for your time once again.
Thank you for your time and for the interview. And most of all, sincerely, on a personal note, I thank you for your friendship. It has often been a blanket that kept my heart warm.
Thank you. You're better and more articulate than I am, but I think you can feel from my soul to yours how much I love and appreciate you. And I know people will be touched because people are touched by what's real and what's raw. And there's so much fake in the world. Even reality television is fake, as you well know.
Right.
It's nice. A couple of brothers can get together and talk truthfully. So thank you for that great privilege. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Take care.